Do you unironically like his videos? Yes. He's a hardcore lefty, is he not? I unironically love this channel. This guy, if this guy has like an Amazon buy list, I'll buy him a new microphone. He needs a new one.
In the 80s, with the rise of neoliberalism, the family gained renewed ideological significance. Using the rhetoric of family values, Ronald Reagan shifted the relationship between the family and the state once again, placing the responsibility for society's welfare on the family. Under Reagan, many of the New Deal welfare state programs were cut back or dismantled. As in the days of Theodore Roosevelt, bad families took the blame for social problems ranging from crime to poverty, and the government backed away from its prior commitment to helping families in need. So, while neoliberals were dismantling the very programs that stable families depended on, they simultaneously blamed social ills on bad families, taking responsibility away from the government itself and introducing negative stereotypes like...
Oh, okay, hold on real quick. I'm not going to necessarily disagree with what he's saying here. So this is something that I learned kind of recently, within a year. One of the big things that kind of changed the way Americans viewed government, I think, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong because history's not correct, but I think it was the time of like the Civil Rights Act. I think that was one of the first times where like the federal government came in and was like doing like, well, no, technically the New Deal was before this, but like, well, okay, let me back up again. I know that during the Civil Rights Act, probably as with the New Deal as much, I don't know as much about like New Deal era politics, but I know with the Civil Rights Act, a lot of Americans had a lot of problems because most of the changes that they kind of like pushed for or fought for in society, or most of the things that were related to like taking care of the family or taking care of your neighbor, whatever, came from like these kind of like, these institutions that existed on like smaller levels. So for instance, you're getting skipped, hold on. So like for instance, people, if they needed help with their family, would look more towards churches or more towards their unions or more towards their neighbors and stuff like that. That this was more common than like expecting like a federal government to step in and do anything. And that like taking away kind of like this idea of like community-based stuff and into like this kind of like cold like federal government entity doing things, especially when the federal government was disagreeing with like the local entities, left people with a lot of sour feelings. Now, I can't speak as clearly to like the New Deal era policies, but I know that for like a lot of the civil rights stuff, you had a lot of union leaders and stuff that were still very much like very racist, didn't want black people integrated into their communities. And the federal government was basically stepping in and saying like, hey, listen, fuck your churches, fuck your communities, fuck your unions. We're going to tell you how to do shit. And that left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths because they were used to this type of rule and this type of guidance coming at a more local level. So it's not that like in these eras, I don't know how he's going to present it in this video. Hopefully, like he's not going to say some too crazy shit, but it wasn't so much that like conservatives and stuff were like, I hate poor people, I hate families, I don't want the government helping anything, blah, blah, blah. It was more just like, why does the government come in and do this? Like, these are our communities, like we can take care of them. We don't need the government to do this. This is like not good. This isn't what the government is meant to do. Like, just protect our rights and then like we'll take care of our communities. That's what we're here for. That's like the mind, that's like that's the mindset of a lot of like the traditional like conservative like community, I guess.
Welfare queens and deadbeat dads. The solution to all the worsening social problems was said to be, of course, the nuclear family. And family sitcoms, with renewed popularity, contributed precisely to this ideology with its portrayals of the ideal family. In fact, sitcoms served this function from their very beginning.
Oh, and then also real quick, I'm sorry, just because these things. The concept of the nuclear family is very foreign to, I think, most of the world. Nuclear family shit came like post-World War II. Whenever people talk about like, oh, the gays are going to ruin family structures, this isn't natural. Like, the natural thing is like villages raise children. You have like whole communities of people, families that work together, families that live together, communities that work and live together. And this is how like child rearing and taking care of families was typically done. The idea that it's like just fucking like two people in a house with two kids and that's fucking it. That's like a very alien, that's a very, very, very new invention. This is a very new invention. This is like within a century of like, at least for American family rearing. It's like, it's very, very not natural. So whenever people like try to jerk off like the fucking nuclear family as the, as like, this is how the evolution meant, blah, 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 or this is what it's supposed to be. It's like, oh, okay, well, I mean, we didn't do that for a long fucking time, but.
It's not a coincidence that family sitcoms became a staple.
Do you unironically like his videos? Yes. He's a hardcore lefty, is he not? In some ways he is. Critiques of your system are very important, even if you like your system, because you should understand the drawbacks so that you can design that system better. I don't think there's anything wrong with critiquing capitalism or for having massive critiques of capitalism. They're essential because you want these critiques in order to better design your own system. There are a lot of things that capitalism fails miserably at doing. It probably doesn't adequately provide healthcare. It doesn't solve for environmental issues. It doesn't do well for public infrastructure. And critiques of capitalism pointed in this direction can give us a better understanding of like, okay, well, capitalism sucks in these ways. It doesn't address things like inequality. So, we need to have some kind of external policy to push us in that direction. So insofar as that goes, like everything this guy has done and authored video-wise in terms of like talking about consumerism or like ills of society related to mode of production for our economy or whatever, I think have been like pretty interesting. My problem with lefties is never that like, oh, like you are critiquing capitalism. Most lefties are too stupid to critique capitalism because in order to critique a system, you generally have to understand it. And most of these people don't understand leftyism, Marxism, or capitalism. So their words are generally as worthless as their Twitter accounts are. But like, wait, where was I just before that? Oh yeah, usually my issues are just like when people try to change things, they don't have any good suggestions. Like a critique of a system, people oftentimes think that a critique of a system is a refutation of a system. Now, a critique might be necessary to refute a system, but it's not sufficient. Like a critique of a system just tells you something that maybe needs to be changed, or maybe needs to be remedied, or maybe needs to be accounted for. It doesn't necessarily mean the entire system has to be abandoned, and people mix that up a lot, mainly because they're fucking morons. But like people will say something like, oh, like capitalism fails in this and this and this, and it's like, yeah, that's fucking true, dog. Amen. And like, yeah, that means we gotta get rid of it. It's like, no, not really. There's a lot of things that fail at a lot of things, and we remedy these systems and we supplement them in other ways. Now, that's not to say that capitalism needs to be a necessary thing or a component of human existence from now until forever. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But just because you can critique something doesn't mean you necessarily have to get rid of that thing or abolish that thing or destroy that thing. A critique can just be like a critique could just be a guide or like a pointer for, like this is something that you need to keep in mind and change. Sorry. Okay. Anyway, most of this guy's videos that I've seen have been really good so far, but
of American television in the late 40s, precisely with the start of the Cold War, as an emphasis on the family was an essential part of Cold War propaganda. The traditional nuclear family was portrayed as the building block of a healthy nation and used ideologically to attack the Soviet Union, where housewives were less common. Indeed, it was at this time that many of our stereotypes about the perfect nuclear family arose, and family sitcoms played an essential role here. The wise, authoritative father that leads and guides the family, the loving, passive housewife, and the children who may misbehave to an endearing extent, but are ultimately submissive and conformist. But then, in 1989, came The Simpsons, and did the exact opposite. The show took the standard family sitcom format and completely turned it on its head, mocking that very ideology that family sitcoms had been made to support. So much so that in Costa Rica, The Simpsons were even banned on the grounds of being anti-family values. The result was a depiction of all the common negative aspects of the American family that sitcoms were supposed to ignore. An ignorant father, often incompetent, with some aggressive inclinations towards his son. A housewife whose emotional repression and lack of fulfillment was made explicit. A rebellious son, distrustful of all authority. And a daughter who is the smartest member of the family, but is hardly ever listened to. This depiction was unapologetically subversive, and it didn't end there. Sitcoms, by their very structure, tend to favor the status quo. Because each episode must start out on a familiar, clean slate, any problems that occur within an episode must be presented very superficially, such that they can be resolved before the episode ends. The ending is then always a return to the regular, happy state of affairs, the status quo. As Matt Groening said in an interview, television touches on an issue, then dances away from it and never comes back to it. So it has the illusion of having a strong point of view, but the real point of view of television is that nothing matters, because it's going to be replaced in the next millisecond by something different, and then replaced again and again. Of course, The Simpsons had the same standard episodic sitcom structure, but
something that I super duper appreciate in sitcoms or in anything that is so fucking rare is some sort of permanence. Rick and Morty did this, at least in the first season. I don't vouch for any part of Rick and Morty past season 1, because holy fuck, that show got fucking shit. Rick and Morty does this, and then also, supposedly, I haven't watched it at all, but I've heard so many good things about it. BoJack Horseman apparently does this as well. There was some bullshit that I read a while ago where, like, apparently some girl has depression, and I think she, like, gains weight or whatever, and that weight gain or whatever I think stays throughout the remainder of the entire show. She never, like, goes back to being whatever, and then another person, like, loses weight or something, like, and they maintain this throughout the entirety of the show. Like, that never goes back. Like, maintaining some type of permanence from, like, episode to episode is, I don't know, that's just something that I, like, super duper appreciate in shows, and it is, like, incredibly fucking rare. But yeah, I don't know why, or maybe because they just want to go back to normal every time so they can start over again on a new idea or some shit. I don't know.
Writers came up with a brilliant way to resist this glorification of the status quo. They introduced the critical social commentary not just within the plots of particular episodes, but within the very premises of the show. Groening said, "In conceiving the show, I made sure that Homer worked in a nuclear power plant, because then we can keep returning to that and making a point about the environment." The social problems are then not matters easily resolved by the end of the episode, but inescapable premises that the characters always have to live with. The Simpsons family is dysfunctional. Homer works in a nuclear power plant that ignores safety regulations and environmental concerns. The local school is horribly underfunded. The town mayor is completely corrupt. The police force is incompetent. And none of these problems have quick, ideologically convenient solutions.
This was a great way to make extra money, renting out our cloakrooms to the overcrowded prison system.
Before The Simpsons, most family sitcoms had social problems that were resolved by deferring to tradition and authority.
My main problem with The Simpsons, and I will always stand by this, is that it is just painfully unfunny. And I just have never been convinced otherwise. It is so hard for me to laugh at anything in The Simpsons, but...
Often thanks to the wise, authoritative father. Alternatively, the authorities in cop shows, by the end of the episode, would defeat the criminal of the day, restore order, and thereby showcase the superiority of American justice. The problems introduced were not only treated superficially, but resolved in a heavily ideological manner. Once again, The Simpsons subverted this. Instead of deferring to authority figures, the show presented authority figures as incompetent, ignorant, or corrupt. Simpsons writer George Meyer said that if there is a point to The Simpsons, it's to get people to re-examine their world, and specifically the authority figures in their world. This might not seem that special today, especially with the amount of Simpsons-inspired shows we have, but keep in mind that before The Simpsons, there was nothing like it. All the episodic shows on American television focused on showcasing the sacredness of family, authority, and American values, all of which were attacked, exposed, and mocked by The Simpsons.
All right, men, here's the order of deportations. First, we'll be rounding up your tired, then your poor, then your huddled masses yearning to breathe free.
Breathers. Got it.
The closest thing to it was Married with Children, but its social critique was nowhere near as extensive, and sometimes leaned towards the reactionary. It was unheard of for a TV sitcom, especially one this big, to repeatedly point out how underfunded public schools were, or have the most powerful man in town be a capitalist with no concern for human well-being. It was even more unheard of for a TV show to casually criticize the electoral system.
It's true. We are aliens. But what are you going to do about it? It's a two-party system. You have to vote for one of us.
He's right. This is a two-party...
And imperialism.
I don't understand why we have to build a ray gun to aim at a planet I never even heard of.
Don't blame me. I voted for Kodos.
or even put forth a systemic critique of the police force.
Mom, I know your intentions are good, but aren't the police a protective force that maintains the status quo for the wealthy elites? Don't you think we ought to attack the roots of social problems instead of jamming people into overcrowded prisons?
It is no wonder that in the beginning, conservatives tended to be outraged by the show and often accused it of causing moral decline. George H.W. Bush once famously said in a speech,
"We are going to keep on trying to strengthen the American family to make American families a lot more like the Waltons and a lot less like the Simpsons."
The Waltons was a family drama from the early 70s, precisely the kind that sought to portray the ideology of the ideal American nuclear family, and it was set in the Great Depression. In response, a rerun of The Simpsons had Bart say,
"Hey, we're just like the Waltons. We're praying for an end to the Depression, too."
Now, I don't want my claims to be exaggerated. Obviously, The Simpsons weren't going to cause a revolution, but they did achieve a level of subversion and political commentary never before seen on mainstream television, and this was one of its appeals. It mocked the ideological and moralizing aspects of television that many people implicitly knew to be bullshit. But as any fan knows, there came a point at which The Simpsons greatly decreased in quality, declining on all fronts, becoming a mere imitation of its former self. It became what many fans call zombie Simpsons. The show went from being one of the most significant things on television to being indistinguishable from numerous other sitcoms, more and more of which kept popping up. Not only did the show become less funny, it became less clever and less sharp in its social commentary, and the characters lost their personalities, becoming mere shells for whatever the writers wanted to place in them on a whim, or alternatively became mere parodies of their personalities. The steady decline of The Simpsons is most often said to have started with season 9, at which point the show's reception markedly changed, and it only got worse from there, with some episodes being borderline unwatchable. Undoubtedly, one of the reasons for this decline was the profitability The Simpsons had reached. There are numerous examples of a franchise or a company becoming profitable to the point of being too big to fail, and thereby putting less effort and fewer resources in producing something of exceptionally high quality. Right libertarian ideologues will often argue that capitalism is about pleasing the consumer, and that therefore the product of the highest quality will always win out in the market. But this is plainly disproven by the way in which large corporations, as they get exponentially more profitable, keep releasing more and more badly made video games or badly built consoles, or The Simpsons with its badly made episodes.
Careful. So that word badly that he's using, we need to qualify that a lot. So when we when we say that The Simpsons became bad, what we really mean to say is that they strayed away from what we originally liked about them. But in some ways, that made The Simpsons better, and that it was probably more palatable to the masses. That would be my guess. Now, actually, I don't know in terms of The Simpsons specifically, because I don't know their viewership numbers. But I know for video games, that's true. I think that video games used to be a lot more like original and creative, like a long time ago, and now it's kind of like copy-pasted design after copy-pasted design. And even though somebody, like I would argue, like, well, video games have gotten worse in a lot of ways. Well, I mean, a lot more people play them now, and they're a lot more commercialized now. So in some ways, they got better. It's just that they no longer have the same appeal to the original hardcore fan base that was originally there, and now they appeal more to like a consumer fan base. So, for instance, comparing something like the old Raj Royales that had like a lot of like crazy shit that maybe wouldn't have appealed to as many normal people, to like the current like Austin Lover hosts that appeal to a bunch of like prepubescent 12-year-olds that become fans of shitty streamers like Minx. There's it's not necessarily worse or bad. It's just different in a way that it's more palatable to like massive amounts of people.
Franchise is already widely known, and a lot of capital is available to advertise the hell out of it even more. Companies know that their products will be bought and consumed even if they suck, merely because of how popular they are. Then, less capital needs to be invested into actually producing a quality product, and the profitability increases. At a certain point,
like, fuck, I just fucking said how sick this guy's videos were. So like, this whole point is just, I just don't think this is true. I don't think things get so popular that they self-perpetuate themselves. if I had to guess, I'm guessing that at the top, it's probably fucking cutthroat that once something becomes popular, it maintains its popularity. I mean, like when it comes to like popular TV shows, popular musicians, popular movies, like this shit will switch places like all the fucking time. I'm pretty sure people are constantly fighting and vying for these positions at the top of like pop culture and shit. Like you'll see some musician come out with some massive, amazing fucking album and then they're fucking gone. You'd never see him again. It's like literally fucking like one hit wonders. So sometimes it's not even an album. Sometimes it's 1 or 2 singles on the radio and then you'll never hear from these people again. Like the idea that things remain consistently high quality over time, or rather remain consistently popular over time with minimal effort, I don't think that's really true. I think popular stuff like that top spot is vied for constantly and it changes like all the time.
The main source of profits from the Simpsons franchise became Simpsons merchandise, of which there were insane amounts. Every category of product had a Simpsons version. The investors therefore came to see the Simpsons TV show almost as a mere advertisement for Simpsons merchandise, and an advertisement doesn't have to possess exceptional quality. In the study of signs, also known as semiotics, there is a notion known as the floating signifier, or empty signifier. And it could be argued that this is what most Simpsons characters came to be after the show's decline. Empty signs, with no internal content of their own, no inherent meaning. The Oxford Dictionary of Media and Communication defines such floating signifiers as signifiers with a vague, highly variable, unspecifiable, or non-existent signified. Such signifiers mean different things to different people. They may stand for many or even any signifieds. They may mean whatever their interpreters want them to mean. The great blog Dead Homer Society compares what happened to the Simpsons characters with Mickey Mouse. Quote, "As any serious Disney fan can tell you, Mickey Mouse has gone through a number of iterations reflective of the times. He's been kind of racist, he's fought Nazis, he's been an icon of wholesomeness. Mickey has almost..."
You mentioned the argument that Rick and Morty got bad after season 1. Could you make the same argument that you're wrong and use the word bad and just appeals to the wrong? Oh yeah, sure, that it got more. Yeah, of course, sure. I could be more particular. When I say Rick and Morty got bad in season 2, Rick and Morty in season 2, it's weird because it's the same guy involved. I don't remember the guy's name, but Rick and Morty in season 2 feels like somebody watched Rick and Morty in season 1 and was like, oh my God, like this show is amazing. I'm going to make season 2 as a tribute. And the reason why they liked season 1 was because they thought the whole season was XD random. And so then they made a Rick and Morty season 2, and that's what it was all about. It was about XD randomness. That's why you get like, that's why like my favorite comparison between, to show the difference in Rick and Morty season 1 and 2 is the interdimensional cable episode. The interdimensional cable episode in season 1 showed like, I guess like, Rick's kind of general feeling of life, this kind of like meaningless, wandering, Nietzsche-esque, like nothing matters, this nihilistic take on everything, and then the enjoyment, the hedonistic enjoyment of TV, and kind of getting Morty into that feeling, right, was juxtaposed with the two parents, Jerry and I don't remember the mom, Jerry and the mom's relationship with each other, and then they like intertwine these two storylines in a really, really meaningful way, and I think it was really cute. And then you get a callback with Morty showing his sister that they had like died in a previous episode, which brings in a whole bunch of other questions like, well, what does it even mean, the fact that like Morty is in this dimension? Is it even the same brother? And like all of this stuff, and then like the ending on like Rick's note of like, fuck it, at the end none of it really matters anyway, we're all together, like let's just enjoy. Like that was like that episode. The season 2 episode of Interdimensional Cable was, oh my God, aliens want fucking Jerry's penis. LOL. They want his fucking dick, and he's gonna say, does he want to keep his dick and save the world? Does he want to give his dick and some like, it was like unbelievable. It was crazy how stupid Rick and Morty season 2 was compared to season 1. I genuinely believe that season 1 of Rick and Morty is probably one of the best shows, period, that I've ever seen. And season 2 was the most XD random garbage shit I have ever seen in my life. I couldn't believe that. I couldn't believe how XD stupid. I think there were like 1 or 2 decent episodes in season 2, but honest to God, I didn't even watch the end. I didn't even watch the last episode with the Birdman shit. I got so bored of that. How much the show had become a caricature of itself. It was like watching the Boondocks season 4 or whatever. Oh God. Like trying to think of like how clever and cute the episode was with the homeless guy. when they were going through his body, all of that shit in season 1 compared to season 2. Get swifty, shit on the floor, get shit on the floor, and Pickle Rick, like, oh my God, kill me, please. Yikes.
No defined character. He is merely a recognizable symbol.
The A and B stories complemented each other really well in season 1. They did. It's something this is like a technique too when you do stories and like shows. Oftentimes, like a 30-minute episode, you'll have like an A and a B story, and they're supposed to thematically, they're supposed to play off each other. And in season 1 of Rick and Morty, thematically, every episode, the A and the B plots always play off each other thematically. They might not be directly related, but thematically, they're totally tie-in. And in season 2, I don't know if they ever did. I'm trying to think. Fuck, there was like 1 or 2 decent episodes in season 2, but like I don't know, man. Jesus.
Symbol who can be.
Did you see the pilot of Rick and Morty? I did watch the pilot of Rick and Morty. It's fucking horrible. I don't know what happened in season 1. I wonder if there was like a ghost fucking director, like in Metal Gear Solid 1, 2, and 3. There's some like ghost director that should get the credit and not like the actual creator guy.
Made to do anything. That is exactly what a floating signifier is. Thus, any product can have the Simpsons name slapped on it without communicating thereby any particular meaning, without committing itself to any of the social critique that the early Simpsons engaged in. Any company, people of any political persuasion can use the Simpsons characters as mediums for their message. The meaning of the content is abandoned in favor of optics.
Why do people point to art and capitalist systems appealing to masses as being some sort of detrimental thing? If you can make your product more appealing to more people, you will make more money. Yeah, but the problem is that art should probably serve to challenge us in some way. Like in what, like right now, the direction that like art is heading in society is like in 100 years, there's going to be like fucking masturbation machines that we just sit on all day until we die. There was this book that I read a long time ago. This is like a 4 kids book or whatever. I think it was called The Last Book in the Universe. Like all books had disappeared and people just had like VR machines or whatever. But like I think like in this world, the argument was that like entertainment and shit had gotten to the point where like people just put like VR headsets on and then they'll like sit here in VR until they die because it's so pleasurable and nice or whatever. Like art should probably challenge you to some extent. Like it leaves you with a better cerebral feeling to be challenged by some form of art rather than to just finish it. I don't know how to oh man, we're gonna be real pretentious here. Finishing older RPGs felt like finishing a book. Finishing newer RPGs oftentimes to me feels like finishing like another page of Reddit. Like Ubisoft is a really great example of like a very formulaic experience that I don't really have like a very fulfilling feeling when I finish a Ubisoft game. Like I feel like when I beat like any of the old like Final Fantasy games, like when you finish that, you come to like a completion of something that like is the same feeling as like when you close the final page of a book. Where you're like, oof, damn, I'm done. And then for Ubisoft, it's just like checkpoint, walk to the next checkpoint and push A. Dialogue, checkpoint on the map, jump out the build. I don't even have to worry about level design, just jump out building, fly car, checkpoint A. Okay, walk in, checkpoint A. Okay, checkpoint. Kill boss, which is like shooting him 3 times and I beat the game. And it's like, it's so not challenging. It's such an unmentally challenging experience, which is like, like it's very like lowest denominator, very, yeah. It's good in that it's like, it's accessible. Like a lot of people like those dopamine hits, like, okay, new quest, collect 4 berries. Okay, cool. Oh, turn in 4 berries, get 2 skill points, unlock pointless skill tree, where even if I don't take any of the skills, I can still beat the game, but I get some sense of accomplishment for unlocking something that I'd never have to use to kill the final boss at all. Like this, like, Jesus, yeah, I don't know.
Anyone today can say they love The Simpsons, just as any politician can say they support justice or freedom.
How do you convince normies to appreciate the challenge that comes with good art then? You can't. People have to like make a mental effort to do it, because otherwise we'll just like, I don't know, it's like I said about Reddit, like you can just sit there and scroll for 30 hours. Even if you know it's bad for you, like you'll do it. Like, yeah.
Which are also used as floating signifiers. Ted Cruz once said that the Democrats are the party of Lisa Simpson, and the Republicans are happily the party of Homer and Bart and Maggie and Marge. There's A lot that could be unpacked in this statement, and not just the fact that Cruz tried to legitimate his politics by reference to the political allegiance of a baby. It could be pointed out, for instance, that in the classic Simpsons, Lisa was precisely the only person in the family who had a clear social conscience and was politically informed, whereas Homer was often portrayed as socially ignorant and gullible. To be sure, Ted Cruz isn't the most intelligent viewer of the show, but he is just one example of a wider condition, the decline of The Simpsons' subversive edge. Using The Simpsons as a floating signifier, the way Ted Cruz did, is by no means uncommon, so we cannot dismiss Ted Cruz as an isolated instance. Satire always risks being misunderstood, neutralized, or misappropriated, but when it starts to happen to the extent that we see with The Simpsons, it points to a flaw in the satire itself. Plainly, The Simpsons' social commentary grew increasingly impotent. So far, we have analyzed Zombie Simpsons as an example of the way profitability can lead to a decline in the quality of a franchise, and we have analyzed it as an example of the floating signifier. We can also analyze it as a symptom of postmodern culture, as theorized by Fredric Jameson, arguably the most influential American theorist of postmodernity. Fredric Jameson has argued that in postmodern times, parody has been replaced with pastiche. Whereas parody had a subversive impulse and a radical potential, pastiche is mere imitation without critique. Jameson writes that pastiche is, like parody, the imitation of a peculiar mask, speech in a dead language, but it is a neutral practice of such mimicry, without any of parody's ulterior motives, amputated of the satiric impulse, devoid of laughter, and of any conviction that, alongside the abnormal tongue you have momentarily borrowed, some healthy linguistic normality still exists. Pastiche is thus blank parody. See, parody would function by taking elements of the norm, the normal language, and weaponize it against the norm itself, turn it on its head in a way that results in critique. The early Simpsons is a great example of this, even if not one Fredric Jameson himself would use. The Simpsons took up the norms of television at the time, in particular the norm of American family sitcoms, and turned them on their head. It picked up the setup and structure of the American family sitcom and used it against the ideology they were supposed to promote. The social commentary present in The Simpsons was much clearer and sharper than it later came to be, because one could easily see in the rest of television the norms that it was mocking. The standard family sitcom was the normal tongue that The Simpsons parodied by making it abnormal. However, Jameson argues, with the fragmentation of social life and culture, any perceived kind of dominant norm gradually comes to disappear. As the norm is replaced by a bunch of disconnected cultural fragments, it becomes difficult to identify whether something is a parody or merely a stylistic variation, whether something is satire or mere imitation without any critical intent. He writes, "The explosion of modern literature into a host of distinct private styles and mannerisms has been followed by a linguistic fragmentation of social life itself, to the point where the norm itself is eclipsed, reduced to a neutral and reified media speech, which itself then becomes but one more idiolect among many. If the ideas of a ruling class were once the dominant or hegemonic ideology of bourgeois society, the advanced capitalist countries today are now a field of stylistic and discursive heterogeneity without a norm. Faceless masters continue to inflect the economic strategies which constrain our existences, but no longer need to impose their speech, or are henceforth unable to." Although Jameson is speaking here of literature, this is clearly applicable to television as well. When television followed an obvious standard, it was a lot easier to see what was parodying this standard. Today, with endless amounts of TV channels and shows which endlessly imitate and reference one another, showcasing an infinite number of styles, aesthetics, and messages, it's difficult to identify any kind of norm, and therefore difficult to categorize things into what is normal and what is parodying the normal. This would explain why The Simpsons became increasingly less perceived as satire or parody. There is yet another influential theorist of postmodernity whose works can shed light on The Simpsons' decline. My viewers know him as the guy whose last name I hate pronouncing, Jean Baudrillard, to whom I'll now refer to as Jean. The Simpsons became hyperreal. In his text, Mass Media Culture, Jean wrote, "Here we enter the world of the pseudo-event, of pseudo-history, and of pseudo-culture. A world of events, history, culture, and ideas produced not from the fluctuating and contradictory nature of reality, but produced as artifacts from the technical manipulation of the medium and its coded elements. It is this generalized substitution of the code for the reference that defines mass media consumption." The substitution of the code for the reference. What exactly does that mean? Well, we could say that originally, the character Homer Simpson was a reference to something in the real world, namely the dysfunctional American father. But as the popularity of this character grew, he came to be less and less a reference to something real, becoming merely a reference to himself, becoming self-referential. Originally, the qualities that Homer had were pieces of social commentary on the dysfunctional American father, but as Homer became a pop icon, his qualities came to refer to nothing but Homer himself. He eats a lot because he's Homer, and we all know that's what Homer does. He's incompetent and ignorant because he's Homer, and every viewer knows that's how he is. Thus, with each episode, Homer becomes less and less real, gets into increasingly wackier events, acquires increasingly quirky behavior, and increasingly gets comically hurt. No longer referring to anything real, he becomes a mere parody of himself. In other words, he stops being a reference and becomes a mere code, a cultural fragment referring to nothing but himself. This is postmodern culture as Jean sees it, full of empty signs and codes without reference. This is why it also becomes increasingly common for celebrities to appear in The Simpsons as themselves. Here too, we see the self-referential nature of postmodern culture. Celebrities playing themselves are obviously unlikely sources of satire, and that's not what they're there for. They're simply there as part of a cultural code that refers to nothing real other than their own self-referential status as famous people. On IMDb, the two worst-rated episodes of The Simpsons both center on celebrity cameos, Lady Gaga and Elon Musk. The older Simpsons would usually bring in a celebrity, voiced by someone else, particularly a wealthy and powerful one like Elon Musk, to critique them, or at least mock them. But here, we get this instead.
What the?
Dad, no! Elon Musk is possibly the greatest living inventor!
No social commentary, no subversion, no satire, nothing but a flashy image, the empty sign of a celebrity. We watch the celebrity cameo simply because it's a celebrity, just as we watch Homer just because he's Homer. It doesn't matter if the cultural product makes sense or refers to anything, just so long as it follows the culturally established code. Peter Halley, an artist inspired by Jean, says this about postmodern art, but it can be perfectly applied to the TV show as well. Quote, "One can refer to it as either postmodernism or as neo-modernism, but what is characteristic of this order is that the elements of modernism are hyper-realized. They are reduced to their pure formal state and are denuded of any last vestiges of life or meaning. They are redeployed in a system of self-referentiality, which is itself a hyper-realization of modernist self-referentiality, though it is now detached from the modernist dream of revolutionary renewal. In post- or neo-modernism, the syntactical elements do not change. The vocabulary of modernism is retained, but its elements, already made abstract, are finally and completely severed from any reference to any real." Applying this to The Simpsons, we have the same setup, the same characters, but now without life or meaning, reused again and again with no relation to anything real. I would argue that the reason most people today don't think of The Simpsons as social commentary is precisely because of this self-referentiality. Why would Homer be a commentary on anything? He's just a funny character. Why would Mr. Burns be a reference to something political? He's ruthless and exploitative because that's how his character is. In other words, that's the way they're codified. They function as mere codes, not references.
Wow.
There is a concept popularized by the Situationist International known as recuperation. It refers to instances where some cultural phenomenon that was originally subversive, critical, radical, or revolutionary becomes appropriated by those in power and neutralized or made to serve the status quo. Say, punk becoming commercialized, Che Guevara t-shirts, or this $400 anarchist jacket. One could argue that what happened to The Simpsons was a case of recuperation. A show that originally had the explicit intent of opposing authority and media manipulation became perfectly integrated into what it opposed. But one could, drawing from Mark Fisher, make a more cynical argument. In the 90s, neoliberalism, having ended the preceding era of social democracy, was celebrating its victory, and free market reforms were spreading rapidly across the globe. Finally, the dissolution of the Soviet Union, as flawed as the regime was, fully christened the neoliberal claim that there is no alternative. This was the start of what Mark Fisher called capitalist realism, a period marked by the absence of radical politics, a severe lack of political imagination, and the belief, now taken for granted, that there simply is no alternative to capitalism. Culturally, capitalist realism meant that rebellious culture no longer even had to be recuperated. It was now neutralized and appropriated from the start, at its very moment of birth. Rebellion itself became a vacuous selling point. Mark Fisher wrote, "What we are dealing with now is not the incorporation of materials that previously seemed to possess subversive potentials, but instead their pre-corporation, the preemptive formatting and shaping of desires, aspirations, and hopes by capitalist culture." To argue that The Simpsons was from the beginning pre-corporated in this way would make sense. After all, despite its anti-establishment tone, no matter how genuine, it was, after all, broadcasted and owned by Fox, a company run by a bunch of multimillionaires with a firm establishment in the media industry. Even if the show criticized the state of American TV, the ruthlessness of capitalists, or even Fox itself, they still, at the end of the day, depended on Fox and were making them a lot of money. The writers were obviously aware of this irony. It's almost in desperate acts of resistance that they attacked Fox so many times in the show.
Lisa, ordinarily I'd say you should stand up for what you believe in, but you've been doing that an awful lot lately.
Yeah, you made us march in that gay rights parade.
And we can't watch Fox because they own those chemical weapon plants in Syria.
In an interview, Groening was once asked, "Being that those are your political leanings, have you ever woken up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat that you've helped make Fox owner Rupert Murdoch even more rich?" And Groening responded, quite truthfully, "Well, I can't say that there's any magic happy studio out there where everyone's nice and wonderful. Again, I remind myself constantly that my relationship is with my audience." If the Simpsons team refused to work with Fox, they wouldn't have gotten a spot on TV at all, and would have never reached anywhere near the amount of people they had. Some other more reactionary show would have probably taken their place, and that's not much better either. Once again, there's that inescapable feeling that there just is no alternative. It would be difficult to accuse the Simpsons writers of hypocrisy here, as they simply had no alternative. They had to either reach people by collaborating with the industry giants, or give up the industry and the TV show with it, which wouldn't be much more effective. As an example of a rebellious figure who suffered from this pre-corporation, Mark Fisher mentions Kurt Cobain. He writes, "In his dreadful lassitude and objectless rage, Cobain seemed to give wearied voice to the despondency of the generation that had come after history, whose every move was anticipated, tracked, bought and sold before it had even happened. Cobain knew that he was just another piece of spectacle, that nothing runs better on MTV than a protest against MTV, knew that his every move was a cliché scripted in advance, knew that even realizing it is a cliché. And just as nothing runs better on MTV than a protest against MTV, so one could say that nothing runs better on Fox than a joke against Fox. Fisher writes, "The impasse that paralyzed Cobain is precisely the one that Jameson described. Like postmodern culture in general, Cobain found himself in a world in which stylistic innovation is no longer possible, where all that is left is to imitate dead styles, to speak through the masks and with the voices of the styles in the imaginary museum. Here, even success meant failure, since to succeed would only mean that you were the new meat on which the system could feed." I believe that the early creators of The Simpsons worried about this deadlock just as much as Kurt Cobain did. And I also believe that they did the best they could despite this deadlock, that they made the show as subversive as they possibly could. The Simpsons was unprecedented in American television, and there was truly a sense of cultural hope and boldness in those early seasons. But if capitalist realism has the kind of oppressive atmospheric presence that Mark Fisher says it has, such efforts were doomed from the start, as a single TV show could never resist an international cultural condition. To tragically struggle against an inescapable condition was the best they could do. Kurt Cobain and Nirvana were followed by grunge-influenced bands that were not only pre-corporated, but, unlike Cobain, didn't even care about this fact. Bands that didn't even mind their cultural impotence so long as they got paid. Likewise, the golden age of The Simpsons, despite struggling to maintain its subversive edge, came to be followed by the seasons of Zombie Simpsons, a new version of the show that seemed happy with its cultural impotence, or perhaps not even aware of it. Hannah Arendt once wrote that the greatest enemy of authority is contempt, and the surest way to undermine it is laughter. This quote encapsulates at least part of the spirit of the classic Simpsons, but our times prove that this claim is completely wrong. Today, ridiculing political authority is common, anyone can do it, and everyone knows that our political authorities are corrupt, incompetent, and exploitative. It's even banal to point it out. And yet, people still submit to political authority just as strictly as ever. Even those who have no faith in state-sanctioned ideology in practice act as if they are its passionate adherents. We can see this, for instance, in the recent US elections. This year, as well as in 2016, the majority of voters heavily disliked both candidates, and it had never been this common to ridicule both of them or to acknowledge the failure of the two-party system. Responding to the political candidates with laughter is what most people did. Time and time again, the American electoral system appears as so plainly...
So a lot of this is getting into more empirical stuff that I kind of disagree with, I guess. Although I guess the analysis is still interesting. I think that something that I think hurts our ability to understand a lot of political stuff is I really do feel, this is a little cliche to say, but I really do feel like extremism is just far more entertaining. I don't even know for me personally if I would watch any like measured, reasonable take on any political issue. Like just watching people scream at the extremes is so much more entertaining. People can always complain over and over again that like, oh, I don't like this candidate, I don't like this person, but like, I mean, hey, these are what the people voted for. Sometimes I wonder if people genuinely don't like the candidates or if they just don't want to take responsibility publicly for the things that they actually support or what. I'm sure it's a more complicated, multifaceted issue than that. But I never buy this thing where it's like, oh, nobody likes either candidate. Like you had a lot of other people to choose from in 2016 if you were a Republican, whether you like him or hate him. Rubio was a cooler dude. Cruz was a cooler dude. Kasich was a cooler dude. You had way other people besides Trump. Trump won overwhelmingly. You don't get to have him win like in that strong of a landslide, given how unknown he was going into it, and then complain afterwards that like, oh, well, like nobody likes Trump, And then same thing with Biden as well. Like, yeah, we hear on social media all the time that nobody likes Biden, but it's like, I mean, who else?
And unapologetically deficient and ineffective, and gives voters so little to choose from that most people know as a matter of fact.
Like even at this, like in 2016, the Republicans had so many people to choose from, and in 2020, Democrats had quite a few people to choose from. I actually think in 2020, I think you had a really good range of people. You could move all the way to the left with people like Bernie Sanders or people like Elizabeth Warren, not quite as left, and then all the way to the more moderate/right side. I don't know where Tulsi Gabbard fits in there. Biden is definitely more moderate. Pete Buttigieg was definitely more moderate. People like Steyer or Bloomberg were more moderate. You had like people that kind of played these middling establishment/progressive grounds. Like Kamala Harris was a big Medicare for all person, but like a little bit more. I don't remember if Klobuchar was Medicare for all or not. I think Warren eventually had to change her position on Medicare for all because it was so unpopular. I think it was either Warren or Kamala. I think it was Warren that changed. But like, yeah, I mean, like there was a decent variety of choice in this. There was a decent variety of choice in this Democratic nomination cycle. And same thing with the Republican one. You've got like fucking 10 candidates on each side here. The crying of like, oh, if there was a third party, like, I don't know, Steyer, like people cry about a third party. Steyer was literally I shouldn't say this, I don't know the whole Green Party platform, but it felt like Steyer was like a Green Party candidate in this Democratic primary cycle. Like the guy literally was a single issue candidate. I'm a billionaire and I want to do everything I can for climate change. It was the only thing that he cared about, So yeah, I don't know. I think that there was a decent amount of choice. Yeah, I think he was a decent amount of choice there.
That it's broken. And yet, in practice, the same people who ridicule it end up treating it as the most significant thing in politics, treating it with the faith and reverence that they simultaneously ridicule in words. Zizek points out that today, ideology no longer has to take the form of an illusion that we believe to be true. It has permeated everyone so effectively that it functions even if no one believes in it. He says, the prevailing ideology is that of cynicism. People no longer believe in ideological truth. They do not take ideological propositions seriously. Cynical distance is just one way, one of many ways, to blind ourselves to the structuring power of ideological fantasy. Even if we do not take things seriously, even if we keep an ironical distance, we are still doing them. In one sense, then, this new form of ideology, the ideology of cynicism, ironic distance, is even more effective than the traditional kind of ideology. When we know that we are falling for an ideology we don't support, that we are contributing to a system we ourselves find unjustifiable, it helps to be cynical about it and to ironically distance ourselves from the situation. It gives us a kind of free pass. Sure, I may be going against my own convictions, I may be submitting to a system I oppose, but it's okay because I'm aware of this fact, and so my actions are only ironic. They're not sanctified by my beliefs, and so are not to be taken seriously. Mark Fisher writes that, according to Zizek, capitalism in general relies on the structure of disavowal. We believe that money is only a meaningless token of no intrinsic worth, yet we act as if it has a holy value. Moreover, this behavior precisely depends upon the prior disavowal. We are able to fetishize money in our actions only because we have already taken an ironic distance towards money in our heads. As an example, Mark Fisher refers to WALL-E, a movie which criticizes corporate monopolies and the environmental destruction they cause, yet effectively props up that same ideology. Fisher writes, this kind of irony feeds rather than challenges capitalist realism. A film like WALL-E exemplifies what Robert Fowler has called interpassivity. The film performs our anti-capitalism for us, allowing us to continue to consume with impunity. The role of capitalist ideology is not to make an explicit case for something in the way that propaganda does, but to conceal the fact that the operations of capital do not depend on any sort of subjectively assumed belief. And one could reasonably argue that this is the function that The Simpsons came to have. Matt Groening once said that he used The Simpsons to wake people up to some of the ways we're being manipulated and exploited by modern American culture. In line with this, many Simpsons episodes have ridiculed American television, presenting it as a waste of time, as dumbed down, lacking in quality, culturally worthless, or criticizing its negative social effects. But such meta-commentary, rather than encouraging resistance to bad pop culture, eventually ended up justifying it through ironic disavowal. I may be wasting my time watching television, but it's okay because I'm self-aware, and I'm only doing it ironically. Given enough time, such ironic meta-criticism becomes indistinguishable from what it is criticizing, and that's precisely what happened with The Simpsons. Not only did the late seasons come to exemplify all the worst TV show tropes and stereotypes, it was no longer even clear whether it was a parody of bad TV or just plain bad TV. What originally arose as a social critique of the dysfunctional American family came to function as an ironic justification of the dysfunctional American family and the world it occupies. What conclusion can we draw from this? Is there any hope left for the possibility of popular but subversive culture? One thing is clear. If such a possibility still exists, it will not be funded by industry giants. If we want a genuinely radical culture, it will have to be organized and produced through alternative means. And it seems pretty likely that the internet would be a big part of those means. We will know we have succeeded when we have a culture so subversive that major corporations refuse to fund it, let alone attempt to recuperate it. And now I'd like to thank my patrons, who helped me out immensely. Anti-LXIX.
Nice. Good, man. Can you please please sum up that YouTube video we watched about The Simpsons? So the video talks about how The Simpsons used to be something that critiqued society, but as time went on, the characters became kind of more hollow, and they were no longer functioning as critiques of society, but rather empty placeholders for whatever we wanted them to be, and that eventually, like, corporate entities or capitalist systems, not capitalist systems, but any system that is being critiqued will like assimilate those critiques into itself, that the critiques are no longer actual critiques. So for instance, when we watch The Simpsons and they make some joke about NBC, we all kind of like laugh along, but then we sit there and we continue to watch them supporting NBC, not NBC, sorry. I think it's NBC, I don't remember what it is. Yeah, it's something like that. Oh, Fox, not NBC, sorry. There is literally more anti-capitalist critique in media than ever before. Is there though? I guess that's kind of the question, huh? Oh, fuck. I'm not trying to anti-dick right here. God damn it. I'm really not trying to anti-dick right here, I promise, okay? But, I feel like this is like the perfect... Oh, wait, where's that one video? So, somebody link me the video, because this is like the perfect embodiment of like... of what I feel like that video was like talking about. We're not going to watch this whole thing or whatever, just like...
I'm here to talk to you today about music, art, fashion, one of the greatest problems that our generations are facing. The biggest scourge that affects our society. Against all of the cultural and social progress we've seen is the battle.
So we have like the embodiment of like a commercially safe, like attractive, fun music, high fashion clothes, like super fashionable styles and everything, jokes about like girls wanting to be talking about fashion and stuff in here. And this is what's selling us like our anti-corporatist message, right? This is kind of like, I think this is like the example that video would probably give in terms of like, this is a kind of a critique on society that's been assimilated into society. So the critique is safe. Like in some ways it's critiquing society, but in another way it's kind of like subsumed by society. It's already been assimilated into it, and now the critique is safe. And then another argument that video went on to make that was interesting is that because we're critiquing society in some sort of way, that critique serves as like as a way to disarm us from actual critique. So for instance, like, oh, like I hate capitalism. Well, how do you know that? Well, because I watch a lot of capitalist stuff that critiques capitalism. And because I watch that stuff that critiques it, I feel in a way I've critiqued it, even though that stuff is hardcore participating in capitalism, and therefore I'm hardcore participating in and supporting capitalism. But I am critiquing it because the stuff that I watch critiques it, even though those critiques are part of the capitalist system that are critiquing it, and it's making money off of it, but it's still critiquing it. So I feel like I'm critiquing it, right? Inoculation, might have been the term used. But like, yeah, that's like an interesting example of that. Not that Hassan's not the only one guilty of this. That's just that video comes to mind, but it's a really good example. Is The Boys a perfect example of this? Maybe. It's called Recuperation. Might have been yeah. Destiny's literally doing the can't criticize capitalism because you participate in it bit. Yeah, so I'll keep repeating this argument because I notice that some people it's starting to stick, which I'm happy. So we have like this paradigm that we can exist in where over here we have absolute abject misery because we're trying to fight a system that we live in. And then over here we have an absolute like submission to that system where we're living our fullest life. So when people use that argument like, oh, just because I'm innocent, can't mean I critique it, that's absolutely true. If you're like an auto worker, you're making like fucking $32,000 a year or some shit, backbreaking labor, and you're sitting here saying like, fuck capitalism, this is some bullshit. And somebody points out, yo, motherfucker, you shop at Walmart. How the fuck are you going to critique capitalism when you're paying off the Waltons, right? Well, this guy's like down here. Like his life is pretty fucked. He doesn't have very much room to fight against the system, right? Like this guy's not going to be doing much to protest capitalism when he's like barely surviving, like under the oppressive thumb of said system. It's one thing for a person down here to defend themselves with that argument. Like, well, I can critique a system I live in. I have no choice but to live this way. But it's something different to live up here, the best capitalist life you possibly can, making the most money, signing contracts with the evilest people that you criticize on a daily basis. Like, what is more commercially safe, yet more anti-capitalist than criticizing Jeff Bezos and then signing exclusivity contracts with his company where you run additional advertisements towards your audience to maximize the amount of money that you make? Like, what is more hilarious than that? When you exist up here at this upper end and somebody's like, isn't it kind of weird that like you criticize capitalism yet you participate in it? And you're like, oh, here's that one comic, by the way. Well, if you're going to defend yourself with that comic, then technically you're saying literally every single aspect of capitalism is defensible, because now Bezos can use that comment. Any politician could use that comic. Any dictator, any imperialist, any part of the government, like literally everybody at that point can use that comic. That comic is oftentimes rolled out as a way to defend the innumerable leftists that have the hidden Patreons that are making hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes a month, in order to shield themselves from all criticism. The reality is that these people are lazy. They love capitalism and they're living their best lives in capitalism, and they provide lazy critiques, oftentimes without any policy suggestions of their own, because they've been safely subsumed by a capitalist system and they've been safely, inoculated inside of it? There's not inoculated, it's another word. Recuperated inside of it, such that they can give commercially safe critiques while making a fuck ton of money doing it. Yeah, that's basically all it is. You've also now shown that mobilizing your audience political ends is highly viable as a streamer, so there are things you can do if you object to the way things are and have at least as much influence as you do. Oh yeah, sure. Isn't it good if a certain critique is commercially safe? That's just the progression of society, no? I mean, there's a difference between being commercially safe and like being wholly a slave to that system when you have the means to fight against it. So like, for instance, like I oppose the system in some ways, but I think that I fight against it in ways that I can. So like for instance, like in some small ways, I guess, where I would point to ways that other socials, right? Like whether it's mobilizing my audience to do politically effective things, whether it's trying to pay out large sums of money to a lot of people working under me who I think are less fortunate than me. I think that there are ways that you can exist within a capitalist system while advocating for changes on the other end. I think you can do this. And I even probably do it in like the lowest effort. If it's something that you truly, but I'm a capitalist. I don't even believe like an anti-capitalist shit. So yeah, I don't know. I think that there are ways, if you truly care, that you could participate in the system, but still fight against it. I find, what did I need? 42, 38. I find this argument, I need 6 more of these, that because I'm a capitalist, I can't do anything about it, to be pretty lazy. But not really lazy, actually. I find it the more honest thing is typically that people are just benefiting so much from the system, they actually end up kind of supporting it. I don't want to focus on Hassan too much on this. He's just like, one thing that really sucks is that like I can argue about any other figure infinitely, and people will like listen for whatever. Like we could sit here and bash like Nick Fuentes like 1,000,000 times over, or I could do like any other like conservative figure 1,000,000 times over. But I can't talk about Hassan that much, even though he's relevant to criticize, because people will just say like rent free or whatever, which is kind of annoying, because you basically, by becoming large enough, you kind of like become impossible to criticize, because your entire fan base can be like weaponized against, yeah. Because it's kind of funny, because like if Sargon of Akkad was like the largest figure on this platform, I could criticize him indefinitely, and people are like, yeah, of course you can criticize him, he's like a huge political figure here, why wouldn't you? But like, because it's Hassan and he's so special, like people are like, oh, you can't criticize him, like that's too much, like rent free. It's like, okay, well, Sargon of Ass, man, true. Cyberpunk is a good example. Did Cyberpunk ever patch its shit? Do you think that game is ever going to come back? Do you think CD Projekt Red is going to come out with another game? I've never seen a company burn through so much goodwill so quickly. Holy shit. Rent free is the Trump derangement syndrome of online politics? Yeah, true. Rent free is like it's like your easiest way out. Same thing with like derangement syndrome. Like, oh, like you have derangement syndrome, like blah, blah, blah. Like, oh, like, oh, cool. Well, I guess I could just never criticize you now because I'm always going to be deranged if I do it. Like, congratulations. It's like a win button argument. We need to think of a counter win button argument. Sounds to me like you have derangement syndrome. Like, How meta we're gonna get with it. When I did that project, I explicitly didn't want like any larger figures involved, because anytime you put more than 2 streamers in a room together, they'll start fighting. I just didn't want like any drama or whatever. Next time I might. Although I like, again, like because streamer drama is like so crazy, I kind of like the idea of working on these projects on my own and just bringing in other people as guests, because I don't want to butt heads on like any of the planning. Like I feel like that would get so dramatic so quickly. That Bob Summer guy response, you're gonna drop the nuke? I don't fucking know. I mean, I imagine I'll respond with something, but I already know his responses. He's gonna say that like a lot of the situations were misrepresented. He's gonna say that like he didn't actually mean some things, and some things were accidents, and there was some plan to take down by bows. And then he's probably gonna point to like one situation that might have been exaggerated a little bit. And he's gonna fall back on that and try to say that like that situation is like the one thing that proves that everything else was like bullshit. So I don't know. I don't really care that much. I'm just glad that I got to fuck with him a little bit, because he's been fucking with my personal life like hardcore for a long time. It's been pretty aggravating to me, so. Alright.
Remember to hit that like and subscribe, and don't forget the notification bell so that my videos show up right in your feed.
780 votes to win the election. I need these votes, and I don't care how long it takes me. There's nothing